The Dead Sea Scrolls are the books written by Jewish mystics who called themselves the Essenes. These were individuals who claimed they were living with angels and had received teachings about human transformation into celestial beings. Their texts were stashed away when Rome invaded Palestine in 70 AD, hidden away in caves, and they were discovered surreptitiously in 1947 and caused a worldwide sensation upon their discovery. They are essentially Gnostic in nature because the Essenes themselves were Gnostics. They were interested in self-realization and the perfection of the human body, the transformation of the body into a celestial form or a light body form. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not labeled Gnostic texts as are the Nag Hammadi library, but the core of them, the heart of them, is Gnostic in nature. When we read the Dead Sea Scrolls, it becomes very clear that the Essenes, these Jewish mystics, Gnostic mystics, were having close encounters of the first, second, third, and fourth kind. They said they were seeing angels. They were seeing things in the sky. Portals were opening in the sky. But beyond that, they also had close encounters of the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth kind. The close encounter of the eighth kind is human transformation into a celestial being. The Dead Sea Scrolls clearly describes humans being taken, possibly abducted in a modern conversation, but they didn't think of it as abduction then. They're taken into the celestial realms and transformed into an extraterrestrial or celestial being by angels who themselves were extraterrestrials. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are actually a first moment of disclosure, is what they are. This is very important because when they were discovered in 1947, there was a parallel event, the Roswell crash, when for the first time in modern history, following shortly on Kenneth Arnold's sighting of a squadron of flying discs, that mass consciousness began to think about the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors vis-a-vis the Roswell crash. So it's very powerful confluence there, or synchronicity, that the Dead Sea Scrolls come out of the ground at the very same time that a celestial disk crashes into the ground in Roswell, and now we have this mixture happening. It's like, okay, how do these two things relate? Is it possible that some of the entities that are described in the Gnostic text, the Archons, for example, match up with the entities, the alleged entities that were found in the crash disk at Roswell? When the Essenes are talking about dealing with extraterrestrial beings, are these angels, or are these somehow some other kind of celestial or extraterrestrial races? The Essenes, when they wrote their Dead Sea Scrolls, knew that this information was very powerful for humanity. They were hunted by Rome. They represented a direct threat to the power structure of that time. When the Dead Sea Scrolls come out of the ground in 1947, they too represent a direct threat to the existing power structures of the world, the US government and the religious structures that developed around Christianity. Because what they drew into question severely was, is this the origins of Christianity? Was Jesus an Essene? John the Baptist was. John the Baptist initiated Jesus, attuned him in the baptism. Was he connecting him somehow to an extraterrestrial race? Suddenly Christianity starts to sound like it's an alien religion, or a religion that was brought to earth or promoted by extraterrestrial beings. That represents a direct threat to the powers that be. And this is one of the reasons why the Dead Sea Scrolls were covered up for as many as 3 or 4 decades. Initial reports came out about what was contained in the scrolls, but the scholars withheld vast amounts of it for decades. And I believe the reason why is because of its constant references to extraterrestrial beings, portals, celestial realms, celestial cities, all kinds of otherworldly entities that are described in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and how they were actually living with and teaching the Essenes.
Just 2 years prior to the discovery of the Qumran caves in Israel, the Nag Hammadi texts, otherwise known as the Gnostic Gospels, were discovered in Egypt in 1945. These documents date back to the 3rd century BCE and include alternative views of early Christian doctrine, some of them seemingly blasphemous and heretical to modern followers of monotheistic religions.
Nag Hammadi is a small village along the Nile River in Egypt. And a young boy was tasked by his mother to find kindling, which was in very short supply because there are very few trees. There's no forests that grow along the Nile River in that part of Egypt. Being very resourceful, he went to what he knew were old grave sites and old tombs, and he found papyrus books that were bound. These are the Gnostic texts. And it wasn't until someone recognized, a neighbor recognized what it was that he had, that the Department of Antiquities in Cairo became aware, and of course they moved very quickly to preserve the remaining documents. So the Nag Hammadi Library, it is the most complete record of the Old Testament, and the reason it's so controversial is because it contains many of the books that have not been seen since the church edited them in the 4th century.
Now, I don't want to get mystical or spooky, but it's as though something is at work to not allow us to be blinded and silenced. Something is at work to allow these ancient ideas to come back into the world. And Gnosticism has indeed come back into the world. I'll try to reconstruct the situation. In the early years of Christianity, really, from sort of 30 AD onwards through to about 400 AD, there are actually many different kinds of Christians, many different sects that regard themselves as Christians, as followers of Christ, but they have very different views. Amongst those early Christian sects were a group that called themselves Gnostics. They believed that there is a divine spark in humanity. The Gnostic mission was to liberate that divine spark, to provide us with the saving knowledge, to lead us to the revelation that would help us to understand the true nature of things. Not the illusory nature that's been created to hoodwink all of us, but the real, true nature of things.
What is life for Elon Musk?
Now you can see a video game that's photorealistic, almost photorealistic, and millions of people playing simultaneously. And you see where things are going with virtual reality. If you extrapolate that out into the future with any rate of progress at all, then eventually those games will be indistinguishable from reality. They'll be so realistic, you will not be able to tell the difference between that game and the reality as we know it. Well, how do we know that that didn't happen in the past and that we're not in one of those games ourselves?
I say that what's being described in Genesis is not the creation of the world, but the creation of the simulation. And the bloodthirsty God of the Old Testament, I say, is this archontic force. And the Gnostics described how, in very similar terms, although from another angle, as the Bible talks about how the sons of God, actually the sons of the gods in the original text, interbred with the daughters of men and basically changed the human race. What the Gnostics do is talk about basically the same thing in the Nag Hammadi texts, but they talk about the infusion as a result of this of what they call the counterfeit spirit. The counterfeit spirit is, for me, an expression of this distortion. And the common theme through the ages of some force of good and some force of what people call evil battling for supremacy. When people talk about they have a dark side, I say that's this counterfeit spirit. And the Native Americans have this concept of two wolves inside people. One is goodness and empathy and compassion. One is evil, violence, hatred. And they say, which wolf wins? The one you feed the most. And of course, we have a society in this fake reality specifically designed to make us feed the counterfeit spirit, which is this archontic distortion, as I call it, influencing human behavior and human perception. And it's a frequency band. It has to be, because it's a manifestation of the archontic frequency band.
In his letters, Paul is describing the Gnostic theory of alien intrusion, Archon intrusion into the human race, and warning us about these extraterrestrial beings that seek to take over our souls. The Zadokim are the ultra-righteous wing of the Essene movement. They believed in human perfection In other words, that humans can become whole, holy, and complete, just like Adam and Eve. In the Gnostic belief, in the Garden of Eden story, Adam and Eve did not have bodies of flesh and blood. They had light bodies. And as a punishment, the Old Testament God Yahweh created coats of skin for humanity, the flesh and blood bodies that we inhabit. The Gnostics were intent on reclaiming our original primordial light bodies. And this is what the Zadokим referred to as perfection, returning to our original perfection. And this is very difficult for some people. They look at this and think, well, who are you to become perfect? Nobody's perfect. But the Zadokim believed that humans could transform themselves into perfect light beings, actually returning to our original condition. Gnosticism was attacked and destroyed by Christian orthodoxy because it claimed it possessed the secret teachings of Jesus, of the living Jesus, the risen or resurrected Jesus. Gnosticism also promotes the idea that any individual can have a direct, personal, and visionary experience with the risen Christ. If you can have that, what do you need a pope for? What do you need a priest for? What do you need a church hierarchy for? You don't. The church sells the past Jesus, the past actions. Gnosticism says, let's go into the future. Let's move forward. Today, we are experiencing a dramatic revival of Gnosticism worldwide. We're recovering knowledge of the Gnostic Gospels, where we've recovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now the public literature is starting to open up to the real secret teachings of Jesus, which is absolutely phenomenal.